Yeah, I'm Brian DeYoung, and I'm an architect at SOM here in Chicago, and I am basically the Revit leader for the office here in Chicago on the architecture side, that is. Actually, we're not doing a whole lot in the city. Most of our work is overseas right now in China and other places in Asia primarily.
Small group of five folks who signed up, and Cameron posted questions. So,
Well, I would say it depends on who's doing the modeling. A lot of times, for architects, I tell them to model the columns like you were describing, how it is monolithic. You know, it goes from, say, level 1 up to 20 or whatever it is. And those are typically, he's messing with my microphone here. All right, can you hear me now? All right. Um, so I mean, it really depends on who's doing the modeling. You know, I would say for architects, it's easier. It tends to be easier for them to, particularly on high-rise projects, to model columns going from level 1 up to whatever level it is, you know, 20, 30, what have you. Um, but for structural engineers, the structural department in my office, they always model the columns from level to level. They Yeah, yeah. I mean, particularly if it's a, I'll say, regular building where the floor plates and the column positions and all of that are, you know, in the same location from floor to floor. You can do all kinds of things. You can put them into a group, and then you just have to edit the group, and then all the floors update. The problem that, you know, the projects that I work on, the problem that we run into is that we have columns that are changing in shape and size, and They're not vertical, they're leaning in one direction or multiple directions. And so primarily for that reason, our structural engineers, and for analysis purposes, they model all their columns from floor to floor. The reason that the architects typically model columns spanning multiple floors is because the architects typically start their model first, and it's typically at a rather schematic sort of level. And so we use architectural columns, not structural columns, because we just want to see something in our model. And it's just a whole lot easier if we just, have a column go from level 1 to 10, rather than have it by floor to floor to floor. Right. Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about columns is that in the architectural flavor of Revit, Revit does not allow you to schedule columns, which is one of my pet peeves. But you cannot schedule architectural columns. So correct. And so I have personally, because I don't deal with structural elements, I have personally never created a column schedule. So I don't know if I can really help you with that one. Um, every project that I've ever worked on has had a grid, no matter where it is in the world. That sounds completely bizarre. Hmm. Yeah, that's okay. Yes. Yeah, and then the other thing that we do quite often architecturally is we put a lot of things into our models that don't necessarily show up in our drawings, but we use them just to help us model. So I would maybe possibly suggest if you want to put a grid in a building, you don't necessarily have to show it on any drawings. It can be in there. It can be as a modeling guide, but it doesn't necessarily have to show up in any of your drawings. Yeah, a lot of times the stuff that we end up wanting to hide, we'll create a specific work set for it, and then we'll just close the work set, and then you don't see it. Oh yeah, yeah. We've got. I would I would guess that probably our largest. Of course, the team size fluctuates based on deadlines and things like that. But I would say one of our largest teams was about 12 people actively working on a project in Revit. We usually, on a kind of sort of a day-to-day basis, we're around, I would say, around five or six. But that's our projects are large enough that we don't have just one single model. We'll have, typical project will have, one high-rise model, and a podium model, and perhaps a basement model. And so the team members get distributed out, among several different models.
Okay, actually, leaving is that Gail tuning in? Gail, can you hear us? Yeah, for sure. Uh, Nice to see you. Got Brian DeYoung here, and we have Leland from New York is actually on right now as well. He was asking some questions about Revit and Revit structure. Go ahead, Leland. You were still chatting.
I think the way that we tend to organize our work sets is we think about, for each particular model, we try to think about what are the things that what are the sort of jobs that people are going to have on the project. For a typical high rise, for example, we'll have somebody working on the core. We'll have somebody working on the exterior wall. There's usually people working on the lobby spaces and some of the interior spaces, things like that. So we look at who's doing what on the project, and then we tailor our work sets to those sort of jobs that people have. So typically we'll have a core work set, we'll have an exterior wall work set, an interiors work set, and then we also, quite frankly, we divide up our models as well. So that helps us even further. So, we'll have, say, a tower model, have, one or two people working on that. Then we'll have a podium model, one or two people working on that. And so a combination of dividing up the project into identifiable pieces like that and separate models, and then dividing up those models into work sets, it works fairly well and prevents people from stepping on each other's toes. No, we would build the entire building in one model, but at least from the architectural standpoint, um, we're building the elevators and all of the non-structural walls inside the core, doors and openings and things like that. And then we typically don't do a whole lot of interior work except in the public spaces. So in the lobby, there'll be somebody modeling the interior of the lobby and bathrooms and things like that. Um, but and then so we have an interiors work set and we have a core work set. And for the most part, people sort of stay within one work set when they're working because, like I said, we've tailored the work sets towards what jobs people have on the project. Mhm. Right. Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned stairs. I mean, that's one of the things, particularly on our high-rise projects, that we typically have, one person, and pretty much all that they do on the project is develop the stairs for the project because it's typically such a huge job. So we'll have a stair work set, and that person will work within that work set and build all the stairs throughout the entire project. No problem.
We haven't logged in yet, so Gail, this year you haven't anything you want.
Well, there's a couple of things that you might be experiencing with that. There's all kinds of different ways, different organization tools within Revit. One of them is, what we've been talking about, work sets. Another one is you can actually, and I use this technique quite often because I work on very large projects, and that is to divide up what is one project into multiple files. And then you have, that would be different or RVT files, yes, separate complete project files. And then they are linked together. If you're familiar with CAD and with AutoCAD, it's a similar process to an XREF. So, for example, a typical project, you would create for example, a site file. That site file would contain the topography. If there's anything subterranean in the project, you would create a pad that would basically create a pit for the building to sit in. You would put all of your sidewalks and roads and context and things like that into that site file. But then that's all that you would have in that site file. That's it. You would not build any buildings in that file. Then you would have a completely separate building file where you would actually construct, if we're talking about a single building, that's where the building would exist. Now, the projects that I work on are often multiple buildings on a same site. So we typically have a site file and then say building A, B, and C, and maybe a separate basement. And those are all separate RVT files, and they all get linked into one another. So we have the site file, building A, B, and C get linked into there, so you see everything all together, all three buildings together with the site. And then each of those buildings has all of the files linked in together. So it's basically this sort of flat linked system where everything just gets directly linked into everything else. We don't have a situation where you nest, one file into another and then that gets linked into another and things like that. The reason that we don't nest files like that is that you lose control when you nest things. So we just link everything directly into everything else. And then what we do for documentation is that we either pick one of those files to generate all of our sheets in, or quite often what we'll do is create a whole nother separate file that does not contain any native three-dimensional geometry or anything, but it merely has all of the files for that project linked into it. And then we do all of our documentation. We produce all of our sheets out of that file. And that file is what we call a doc file or a documentation file, because that's essentially all that it has in that file is just our documentation. And there's lots of different reasons why we do it that way. One of the reasons is, I work with fairly large teams, and when you have a lot of people in a single model, it tends to slow everything down. So what we do is we'll have, a couple of people working on the documentation file, adding notes and putting dimensions on and tagging things, producing sheets and, all of that. And then we'll have a few other people actually doing modeling work in the building file. So it helps kind of distribute the team out among several different files. Beyond, linked files and work sets, another thing that you might have been seeing in the models are groups. For example, in a single project, if you have, let's say that you have a couple of bathrooms that repeat on every floor, so that basically the exact same bathroom layout, it just gets stacked, 3 or 4 times for all the different levels of the building. Well, what you can do is design the bathrooms, build the bathrooms on one of those levels, completely finish it, put all of the plumbing fixtures in and the walls and the finishes and everything, and then select all of those elements, put them into a group, and then you can copy that group up to the other levels. And then when you change any one of those groups, they all update on every single floor. So rather than creating a bathroom and then having to make a change and have that change, having to make that change 5 times on all 5 floors. You just make the change once and it updates all 5 floors. And when you click on a group, the entire group highlights. So that might have been what you were seeing in some of the models. No, it basically, I mean, if you can see the screen, I think I'll just go ahead and build something here and show you how a group works. So I'll just create a little box here and let's see, throw a door in there. Mark doesn't let me use my shortcuts, so I stumble sometimes here. Throw the door in there, and let's see if we can grab some furniture or something. Let's see what we have in this model actually. So go to component, place a component, and we got a desk in here. So I'll just throw that desk in. This is just so that we can have a collection of things here. What else? Looks like that's all that we've got in the model. So let me just put another thing in here. And then, so this is going to be our group, but I'm just going to put in a couple of more walls so that we have something that's going to not be in the group. So if we have something like this, and I'll go to the north elevation here, and one of the things that I need to do is go to preview. I neglected to look and see what the height of these walls were. So let's select. I'm going to change the walls so that they're going up to level 2. All right. So this is what we have, and I'm going to take these items right here and put those into a group because that's going to repeat on each floor. Now I'm going to do it vertically, but you can also copy things horizontally. Of course, there's nothing that prevents you from doing that. So I'll go back to the elevation. I'm going to add a couple of levels. So I'm just going to use the copy command to copy some levels here so that we have something to copy to. In order for this to work effectively, the levels should all be equally spaced out. Okay, so we have a few levels there. And go back to the floor plan view. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select just those items right there, those couple of desks, the door, and the walls. And I'm going to put these things into a group. And the button for group, when you highlight something like that, the button for the group is right there. And so you say create group. And it asks you to give it a name, so I'm just going to call it room. And now all of those things are in that group. And so when I click on any of them, the whole entire thing highlights. Now this right here is the origin point for the group. Now, sometimes the origin point for that is not all that important, but sometimes it is. And I'll show you both cases. So what I'm going to do is just move that origin point down to that corner of the walls. So that's going to be essentially my 0, 0 point for this particular group. But what I'm going to do, I want to copy these up to those other levels. I want to be able to copy this group up to the other levels. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight it and copy it to the clipboard. So I just hit Control-C to copy it to the clipboard. And then I go to Modify, Paste, and say Aligned to Selected Levels. And I'm going to say copy to level 2, and then holding the shift key down, I say copy to level 2, 3, and 4 simultaneously. And then I click OK, and it copies those groups up to those other levels. Now I did this with groups, but you can copy anything like I just did. It doesn't necessarily have to be a group. And so now I've got 4 groups that are identical to one another. And if I decide to make a change, I can click on any one of these. It doesn't have to be the original. I can click randomly on this one, and I can edit this one. So I click on that. I say Edit Group. Yeah. And then what I can do is I can edit this however I want to edit. Now, it might be a little bit difficult to see on the screen, but the group that's sort of active, that is black, and everything else is grayed out. So now what I can do is I can click on, for example, this wall and just use the move command and just slide it out a little bit like that. Or I can click on the door and move the door this direction down. Whoops. Move, move the wall. Oh, come on. I'm a shortcut guy, and when I don't use shortcuts, I get screwed up. Okay, so I move the wall, and then I move the door, and then when I click finish, all four of those update, as you can see. So I don't have to change each individual one, I just change one of them and they all update simultaneously. So that's what groups are used for. They're a way of, primarily for a way of editing things that repeat over and over again within a project. Now, yeah, yeah, I actually don't use groups all that often. But whenever I do have anything that repeats, I use them. One of the for the type of project that I work on, the most common thing for me to put into a group and use are in fact bathrooms. Um, you know, the most common thing that I put into groups on the type of projects that I work on are bathrooms, because they, are the same on every level of the project. Now, when I going back a little bit here, when I copied these things vertically, the origin point that I put down here in the corner was basically irrelevant. It didn't really matter that that existed there. But I can also add another one of these groups from the project browser. So if I go over here to the project browser and click on groups and then model, it lists all of the groups that I currently have in this file. And so I can just click on room and then drag and drop it into the project. And when I do that drag and drop, that is when the origin becomes critical. And you can see that my cursor is now attached to that origin point. And so if I want to place this group somewhere else horizontally in this plan, like right there, that's where the origin point becomes important. Go back to the 3D view here. There it is. Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, that's how we typically tailor our projects is we, figure out who's working on it, what they're going to do, and that sort of guides the rest of the process in terms of how the project is set up. Yes, yes, that's correct. Yeah, there's a whole multitude of reasons why we do things that way. One of them is not too long ago we did some benchmarking on files. We basically sort of did some operations in files and then basically timed it to see how long Revit took to do certain things. And we weren't looking for this, but one of the really surprising things that we discovered was that files that contained sheets slowed down other files when you linked them into other files. So, for example, if we had an architectural model and we were doing all of the documentation in that model, and then the structural engineer linked in that model to their model, it took on average about 30% longer to do certain things if that model contained sheets in it than if they linked in a building model that contained no sheets whatsoever and just three-dimensional geometry. So the fact that we not only linking files between disciplines, but the fact that we're linking our own files, amongst ourselves, it tends to make the entire process a little bit lighter and a little bit faster to just be linking in building to building rather than building and sheets. Yeah, so we will create a file that is literally just the three-dimensional building, nothing else. There's no sheets, there's no documentation, it's just the model itself. And then we create a whole nother file which does not contain any three-dimensional geometry at all. We don't build anything in that model. All that we do is link in the files, all the building files, into that model so that we can see everything on the entire project. We can see the building, we can see all of our floor plans and sections and elevations and everything that we need to see, but it's all coming from linked sources. So it's kind of akin to the way that we used to work in CAD, how you had sheet files and then you had drawing files and things like that. It's a little bit like that. And then, like I said before, the other reason that we do it is it helps distribute the team out a little bit more so that we don't have so many people trying to work on one single file at a time. Yes. Yeah. When you use a linked file, actually, why don't I now that I have this file, why don't I save this and I will open up another file and link this one into it just so that I can show you. Yeah. So, and the reason that this is, I mean, having a separate documentation file in the past, I think like pre-version, I want to say 2010 or maybe 2011, it wasn't really an option because Revit had pretty significant restrictions on what you could actually do with linked files. But several releases ago, they basically kind of opened that up and allowed you to do all kinds of things that you never could do with linked files before. So now it's become almost not an issue anymore. You can do pretty much anything that you need to do from a linked file that you can do from just a normal local file. And I need to close this one because Revit won't allow me to have a host and a link open in the same session. Yep, correct. Right. Yeah. Yeah, it does divide up things, between two different files pretty effectively. So I'm in, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, what we typically do is you can't have a host file and a linked file open within the same session, but what you can do is open up multiple Revits. So, for example, if I wanted to have my building file open so that I could edit it, and I wanted to have my documentation file open so I can simultaneously edit some of the documentation, all I have to do is open up two Revits, have the document file open in one, have the building file open in the other, and then it's just a process of if I make a change in the building file, I save it, I reload it into the doc file, and then those changes appear, and vice versa. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and link in that other file, which I saved onto the desktop. Oops, not CAD. But, there it is, project one. I'm just going to have it just, yeah. Yeah, so now in this file, which is project two, this is now the linked file. So this was project one has now been linked in here. So, obviously I can create sheets. I can then take this particular view and put that on a sheet, but I can also tag things from the linked model. So I don't think I put any, yeah, I did not put any rooms in there. So let's see, what can I tag here? Let's see, we've got right tag, yeah. So we can tag walls. Now the information for the wall is not in there, but you can see how even though this is coming from a link, I can still tag it and I can still get information out of it. I can even do things like, even though this is coming from a link, I can even, using the tab key, drill down, select an individual object, and then hide that individual object, even though it's coming from a link. So, like I said, there are a few little issues with doing this, but for the most part, we can get away with doing pretty much anything that we need to do, even though this is coming from a linked file. However, I will say that visibility graphics using links gets a little bit more complicated. And what I mean by that is if you want to try to customize how this is displaying or how it's looking, it adds just one little bit of complexity that you don't normally have to deal with. So if this was not a linked file, for example, I could just open and close certain categories from right here and it would work. Now, I can also do that right now because at this moment, if I go to the Revit links, you can see that it's set to display however the host has been displayed. So if I go and I turn off, for example, doors, the door is going to turn off in this model, which is fine. But there are certain circumstances where you have multiple linked files linked into the doc file. And maybe you want to display one link a little bit differently than another link. Then what you have to do is control it by link. So rather than controlling the settings from here, what you would do is go to Revit Links, click on By Host View, and then you can say Custom, and then you can set these kind of overall custom things. Or you can go into the individual tabs. You can say Model Categories, set that to Custom, and then I can turn the door on here, and then the door comes back. But if I had anything natively built in this file, which I'll go ahead and do, so I'm building this now in this model. I can place a door in there, but the door is still hidden here because that is turned off. But in the link, because I customized the visibility graphics, it's turned on. So that's how you can have either things that are modeled natively, showing differently than what's coming from a link, or how you can control the visibility of one link differently from another link. So it's pretty powerful stuff, actually. But it does add just a slight bit of complexity. It does take a little bit of time for people to get used to it. But I've discovered that once people get used to it and they kind of understand how it all works, that people tend to like it more, even though it is a little bit more complicated to deal with. There are pretty significant advantages in terms of speed and keeping file sizes small and all of that. Mhm. Yeah, we have a couple of people in the office, more senior level people that check drawings and things like that. And using this sort of system, they can open up the documentation file and not worry about screwing up the building itself, because all that they really can have the ability to change is where dimensions are put or where a tag is or what a note says. And all of that is pretty easy stuff to do, and they can do that in the doc file and not have the worry of accidentally, messing up the model somehow. Mhm. Yeah, yeah. There's also this idea of linked views, which I go ahead and save this file now. Um, and rather than trying to open up multiple sessions of Revit here, I'm just going to go back and forth. So I'll close this file. That's our sort of documentation file, and I'll go back to the original file. And one of the, talking about, marking drawings up and things like that, a lot of times what we will do is, this is particularly for interdisciplinary coordination. If the architect needs to point something out to the structural engineer, this opening needs to move, or that column, whatever communication has to go back and forth. What we typically do is we'll set up what we call a linked view in our model. So, for example, what I'll do is duplicate this view, and then I will, because I don't know what else to call it, I'll just call it my name just to make it stand out. And then what I can do is I can make a note, or I can do whatever I need to do to tell someone else on the project that something has changed, or that we need to look at something. So what I can do is just write a text note, something like this, or whatever you need to do. And then you can actually have this view with all of its settings and everything actually display in the documentation file or in the other disciplines file. All that you have to do is tell them which view to look at. So typically how this works is we will create a linked view like this. We'll mark it up. You're basically doing a digital markup of a floor plan. And then we will send an email to the structural engineer or to whoever is looking at this saying, okay, we have this view in our model. Please link it in and take a look at it. So what I'll do is I'll save this and close the file. Yes, yeah, I duplicated it. Yeah, because we typically classify these linked views as coordination views. That's how we classify them in the project browser. So now I'm going to do is open up the documentation file, and then whether this is the documentation file or if this is from another discipline or whatever the case may be. What I can do is go to level 1, and then I can go to visibility graphics, Revit links, and then rather than using custom, what I can do is say by linked view. And then I can set it to floor plan Brian, and it displays exactly what that view looked like in the other file. So you can see here, this door has moved, is now visible in this location, so that somebody that's not working in this file can now see it. Correct. And like I said, we use this technique a lot for coordination purposes. Like we will essentially mark up a view and then send that linked view to another discipline or somebody else working on the project, or a senior person will mark up a view, and then somebody that needs to actually do the production work can link that in, use that linked view as basically a background to see what has changed and then what work they need to do. No, typically when we're going between disciplines, we just send back and forth the building models, and really the documentation is really just for the architect, or it's just for your own use. It typically, I mean, occasionally, for various reasons, we might send it to someone, but I would say 99% of the time, the documentation file is only for the person or for the organization, the discipline that's created it. Yeah. We have had a client or two in the past actually ask for the documentation file, and we send it to them, but we basically don't send it to them unless they ask for it. Right? Yeah. 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 So I'll just create another. I'm back into what the equivalent of our building file now. So I'll just create 4 rooms here, and drop these guys in here. So dropping those rooms in, it gives them a number. I had rooms in this file previously. That's why it started with number 5. It typically starts with 1. And using Revit, you can create color schemes and color plans very, very easily. It's very, very flexible. And you can use all different types of parameters to give you whatever color scheme that you want. So if I click on one of these rooms and I go over here to the properties, you can see these are all the default values. So you've got number, name, comment, occupancy, department, etc., etc. So these are all the defaults. Now I can add any custom parameter that I want, and I can do the same thing. with those custom parameters that I'm about to show you, but we'll stick to these defaults. So just for demonstration purposes, what I'll do is I'll change the occupancy and the department, or I should say I will add an occupancy and a department for each of these rooms, and then I'll show you how those can change with color schemes. So what I'm going to do is highlight this room, and then I'll just add an occupancy of 1, and I'll add a department of A. And then for this one, I'll add, and notice it's already starting to change colors, and I'll show you why in just a second here. So we'll add an occupancy of 2 and a department of B. And then this one will be 3 and C. And this will be 4 and D. Okay, so now each one of those 4 rooms has a different occupancy and has a different department. Now, the reason why when I input that information, the rooms changed color is because I already have a color scheme turned on for this particular view. So let me see where did it go? Oh, there it is. It's hiding. The fact that it said name, I just glanced right over it. It says color scheme name. So the color scheme, the reason why it gave these colors is that I already created an occupancy color scheme. Now the thing that I didn't do, which I should always do, is make sure that whatever parameter is driving the color scheme matches the name. So I'm just going to go ahead and rename that so that it matches, so it doesn't confuse everyone on the project. So now the name occupancy is the color scheme based on occupancy. So that is why the rooms changed color. When I added the occupancy, it was adding a color for those different occupancies. And then if I decide I don't like these sort of default colors, all I have to do is click on color, and I can enter an RGB value or use this or use Pantone colors or whatever I want to do. So that's occupancy. But then if I also want to create a color scheme based on department, which I happen to have over here, I can click on that, and then you can see department. It uses basically those same colors, but like I said before, I can change those colors to whatever I want, and I'll just use the matrix here to get some different colors. And there we have some different colors. So now I've got 2 color schemes in here. And you can see when I flip back and forth between them, the colors change. So if I put it on department, that just saves the colors. And so you can now see that the color scheme is by department. And so the colors of the rooms themselves actually changed. Now that's controlling the rooms and the colors of the rooms. You can have, actually you don't have to access the color scheme always through this button right here. You can access it directly on the Architecture tab. Revit loves to hide buttons. If you click on this bar, it actually opens up this secret little area here. And if you click on color schemes, it takes you directly to this. So a lot of times if I need to edit a color scheme, if I need to change a color or something like that, I'll just edit it by clicking on that bar, color scheme, and then it takes me directly there. And then whatever change I make here just automatically is reflected in any views that I have assigned to that color scheme. Now, the other part of the question had to do with legends. And so if you're going to put this on a sheet and you want to tell the end user or the client what these colors actually mean, what they represent, you can add a legend. And that's actually on the Annotate tab. And you go over here to all the keys. The buttons all got squished together here, so let's try and find it. Component, legend, no, that's not what we want. Oh, where'd it go? One of these buttons here. When you reduce the the screen, all of your buttons get, there it is. So that's why I couldn't find it. So there it is. So color scheme or color fill legend, and then it automatically gives it the name. So it'll say department legend, and then it says green represents A, purple represents B, etc. If I switch this from department to occupancy, the legend also automatically switches. Now you see how the name changes as well? That this name, that title, actually comes from this right here. So whatever you want the title of your legend to be, you just type it in here. So if I want it to just say legend, not be specific at all, just say legend, all caps, I just type it in there, and then that is what is displayed. And it says green represents 1, cyan 2, etc., etc. And so that is, and you don't change anything about the legend. The legend should just automatically fill itself out. There are a few parameters with the legend though. So if I go into edit type, you can specify the size and shape of these boxes they're called swatches. So you can change the size and shape of those. You can also change the font size and the title font size and, all of those sorts of things. Those are all graphic settings that you can change with the legend itself.
Um, so is it, I believe it's
You're welcome.
good. Well, awesome.
Thanks.